Gordon Lightfoot wrote the soundtrack to a certain era of Canadian history. But his music and songwriting, while entirely of this country, transcended eras, genres, and international borders as one of Canada's first true global superstars. He left this world with tour dates still on the books, hardly slowing down even in his mid-80s. With us now to reflect on that incredible musical legacy, let's welcome, in his hometown of Orillia, Ontario, Pam Carter, president of the Mariposa Folk Foundation and the chair of the festival organizing group, and in Oakville, Ontario, Alan Cross, music journalist and host of the radio program The Ongoing History of New Music. That's on Toronto FM radio station 102.1 The Edge. And I want to thank both of you for being available on such short notice to have this discussion about an absolute legend. And let's start by hearing the man himself. It's 1974, and Sheldon, you're going to roll it.
If I could read your mind, love, what a tale your thoughts could tell. Just like a paperback novel, the kind in a drugstore would sell. When you reach the part where the heartaches come, the hero would be me. The heroes often fail, and you won't read that book again because the ending just too hard to take.
Alan, to you first. Got to be a backstory there. What's the backstory on that song?
It's one of his biggest hits. It showed exactly how Gordon Lightfoot could twist a lyric and made it to a melody and turn out to have a worldwide hit with it. You know, Bob Dylan was such a big fan of that particular song, actually just about every Gordon Lightfoot song, and it's an essential part of his canon.
Pam, you're at ground zero for Gordon Lightfoot. It all started there. What do you think it is about his music that resonates so marvelously with so many people?
I think part of it is he touches all generations, and his lyrics are such that they can be understood by everyone. We've all had experiences in our lives that we can find in Gord's music. And being an Orillia son, he certainly is revered and honored in this community, as well as across the world.
Alan, he could have lived anywhere. He chose to stay in Canada. You know why?
Because he was a Canadian. I did talk to him about this once, and he said, no, I was born in Orillia. I am from Canada. I am Canadian. I think and sing and perform about Canadian things. Yes, I could be like my contemporaries, Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and go south to maybe find fame and fortune there. But no, I choose, like Buffy St. Marie, to stay in Canada and focus my energies here. And that worked extremely well for him. It was a good strategy because he was able to have a massively successful, commercially successful career in the 1970s without having to leave Canada.
Having said that, Pam, do you think it did cost him anything? I mean, we could add Leonard Cohen to the list of artists who also ended up living most of the time in Los Angeles. Do you think it cost him anything at the end of the day?
I don't think so at the end of the day. I think Alan's quite right. He certainly had presence in Canada as well as across the world, and he was certainly renowned by all that encountered his music and those that knew him. It's really interesting being out yesterday, the local connections to Gordon, because he did grow up in Orillia.
Tell us about that. What was his relationship with Mariposa like?
It was excellent. The first year of Mariposa in 1961, he was not accepted to be in the lineup because he sounded too much like the Everly Brothers. And Gord commented on that at our main stage last year, and he said that couldn't be all bad, could it, to be compared to the Everly Brothers? and he was quite right. 1962, he was accepted, and his career was taking off. And I would say Gord's been a huge supporter of not only the community of Orillia and various institutions in the community, but also Mariposa. So in 2000, when Mariposa came back to Orillia after, a varied nomadic journey across Ontario, Gordon was the headliner for the first year back, and that ensured the success of Mariposa going forward. People bought tickets to see him. He waived his fee, and it really set Mariposa on a road of success that we haven't turned back from in the last 23 years. So we certainly are grateful for that.
That's an extraordinary, generous thing for him to have done, particularly, Alan,
Yes.
since the place rejected him at first. I mean, wouldn't you want the name and address of the person who had the temerity to reject him back in 1961?
Yeah, that's kind of like Decca Records saying that beat groups and rock and roll combos were out and refusing to sign the Beatles. But he was in his formative years in the early 1960s. He really hit his stride starting in about the mid 60s. And I think he was embraced by Canada for a number of reasons around then. He was in the right place at the right time because let's go back to 67, 68. Canada had just celebrated its centennial. It was this young country with full of optimism and promise. Expo 67 in Montreal. We had the Yorkville scene in Toronto, that 2 square block area north of downtown, where it was a breeding ground and incubator for so many acts. Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Buffy St. Marie, John Kay, Rick James. It goes on and on and on. He was an important part of that. And then by the time we get to the early 1970s, his sound was such that, like I said earlier, he was an international phenomenon. And as a matter of fact, I think that people who did not grow up with Gord in the 1970s, that time when he was at his commercial peak, don't realize exactly how big of an artist he was globally and what kind of an influence he had on so many other songwriters around the planet, including the biggest names you want to mention.
Well, this would have been one of those hits that made him just a superstar. Sheldon, let's go.
The leisureland's on from the Chippewa down of the Big Lake, big old get sugar man. The lake, it is said, never gives up the dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. But the Lord mine owns 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That big ship and true was a bound to be chewed when the gales of November came running.
I don't know how to answer this question. I barely know how to ask it. But Alan, you first and then to Pam. You wouldn't necessarily have thought that there was a hit record in a song that goes into such engineering specifics about the sinking of a ship in a Great Lake. And he did it as well with the Canadian Railroad Trilogy, which was commissioned by CBC in 1967 to celebrate our centennial and was an ode to the building of the railroad. And again, a long, long song that goes into chapter and verse about all of this. How do you take that kind of specificity, Alan, and turn it into a hit record?
It's very difficult. I want to say thank you, Gordon Lightfoot, for the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald, because as a radio person in the era when we had to play records on the radio and we had deadlines every 3 minutes, there was nothing like the record of the Edmund Fitzgerald to give somebody a little bit of a bathroom break. Thank you very much. And also my favorite Canadian song ever, written in 6/8 time. It was very interesting what Gord was able to do, because I think a lot of us of a certain age grew up with Canadian history being forced on us. This idea that it was like broccoli, like vegetables. It's not as exciting as some of the other histories of other countries, but this is where you live. This is what you should be paying attention to. Consume it. It's good for you. And there was that sense of, almost cheesiness with some people who were doing that back in those days. But for whatever reason, Gordon Lightfoot was able to take all these Canadianisms and make them palatable and make them compelling and make them singable. And this is something that we have not seen with a lot of our performers. I guess the best contemporary example would be Gord Downie. In fact, I might go so far as to say that if it weren't for Gordon Lightfoot, we may not have had a Gord Downie and the success the Tragically Hip had with all their Canadianisms.
Yeah, Pam, I have no doubt but that the Canadian Railroad Trilogy was played in schools, in classrooms all over the country, and taught kids that there was a time in this fair land when the railroad did not run. And that's how we learned about the laying of the CPR, et cetera. For you, how do those songs break through, despite the fact that they may also be treatises in engineering as well?
Yeah, the songs have been with me, my whole life, as they have been with various generations, my mother, my grandmother. Yesterday, my nephew sent me a text of his 3-day-old son, my great nephew, listening to Gordon Lightfoot. So his music spans all generations for sure. And I heard an unverified account this morning that not only did the bells ring 29 times for the lost sailors, it rang 30 times, one for Gord. And that's really moving. In 2007, when Gord sang about the Edmund Fitzgerald at Mariposa, the skies opened. The rain poured down. What more fitting background to that song? And I tell you, the audience did not move. They stayed in place and listened to Gord play on. It was really quite a moment in time.
That's a beautiful story. Surprisingly enough, despite all the great songs that he wrote and sang, I think only one #1 hit. And I think this is it. Sheldon, if you would.
Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping round my back stairs. She's been looking like a queen in a sailor's dream, and she don't always say what she really means.
Again, I think there's a backstory here about a tumultuous relationship that went south. Can you fill in some blanks for us?
My all-time favorite Gordon Lightfoot song, simply because of the lyrical wordplay, the harmonies, the haunting sort of groove that goes along with it. 1974, #1 hit in America with a backstory. Around that time, Gord, still living in Toronto, was hanging around with a woman named Kathy Smith. They had, I guess, some kind of relationship, but in 1975 or 1976, she moves to Los Angeles, but not before she inspires Gordon Lightfoot to write Sundown and, maybe one or two other songs. She goes to Los Angeles, where she becomes a drug dealer and ends up being the supplier to people like Keith Richards and Ron Wood of the Rolling Stones. And then in March of 1982, she becomes infamous as the person who injected that fatal speedball into John Belushi. So there's just so many layers to this particular song that you can get lost in that rabbit hole for quite some time.
The same Kathy Evelyn Smith. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah.
That is, wow. Okay. All right, let's, in our remaining moments here, get your favorite Gordon Lightfoot memories. Pam, you want to start us off? What's your favorite?
There's so many. I mean, certainly Gord graced the stage at Mariposa so many times, sometimes as a hired performer, sometimes he would just show up in the parking lot with his guitar and come across. I think the memory that will stay with me the longest at this point is his induction into the Mariposa Hall of Fame in 2022. He was so happy and so gracious. And of course, we had a number of artists who played a medley during that induction ceremony. Tom Wilson curated it. And we had Blue Rodeo on site, and they participated, as did Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. As we were getting ready for the induction ceremony, Tom would come out and say, okay, the Good Brothers are playing now. I had it choreographed to the second. Tom came out and said, okay, Gord wants the Good Brothers. Okay. Then he'd come back, he'd say, Gord wants Serena Ryder. Okay, like no one's going to say no to Gord, right? Gord wants James Keelahan. So at that point, I threw the schedule to the wind and said, whatever Gord wants. Gord played first, which wasn't in the schedule, but, we just ran with it. Tom was great. He was able to get all the artists plugged in and hooked up. Our production team rose to the occasion, and it was such a moment for Gord and for the audience. And when I took him to his car that night, he held my hands and he had a tear in his eye, and he just thanked me from the bottom of his heart for that honor. He was just such a humble and gracious person.
I have to follow up on that because that's a glorious story. I mean, artists grow up dreaming of playing Madison Square Garden or dreaming of playing the Rose Bowl or, some massive venue. They don't necessarily tear up after playing a folk festival in their small central Ontario hometown. What do you think it was about you and about it that made him do that?
I think it was being back in Orillia, playing the second festival, and playing the festival so many times over, and having the industry artists join him in that honor. Gord Gord loved to play to people. He loved to play to his audiences, and they loved to have him play. So I think it was a moment in time, and he was just very gracious and generous.
Alan, how about you? A favorite memory?
I'm going to take this in a completely different direction. Here is a list of some of the people who have covered Gordon Lightfoot songs. Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Barbra Streisand, Neil Young, Glenn Campbell, The Grateful Dead, Olivia Newton-John, Jimmy Buffett, Sarah McLachlan, John Mellencamp, Johnny Mathis, Paul Weller, The Tragically Hip, Jim Croce, and about a dozen others. But I left the punchline out. His biggest fan was probably Bob Dylan. Now, I'm going to give you a Bob Dylan quote, and I remember hearing this and thinking, oh my God. Okay, Bob Dylan, arguably the greatest individual singer-songwriter in the history of the universe. Bob Dylan said this: I can't think of any Gordon Lightfoot song I don't like. Every time I hear a song of his, it's like I wish it would last forever. Then comes this line, also from Dylan: Lightfoot became a mentor for a long time. Now, let's just let that sink in. Bob Dylan, greatest singer-songwriter ever, looked to Gordon Lightfoot as a mentor and teacher. And if that doesn't tell you something about his ability as a songwriter and a performer, I don't know what will.
That's a great one, too. You know, he was so uniquely Canadian, and by that I mean, I remember there was a moment about 10, 15 years ago, it was a bit of an all-star concert at Roy Thompson Hall in downtown Toronto, and Gordon came out and played a couple of songs, and he carried his amplifier out with him. It was just him on stage, plugged into the amplifier, carried it out with him, did his songs, turned around, carried it off. Peter Mansbridge was the MC at the time, and he said, boy, if that doesn't sum up Canada. Gordon Lightfoot carries his own amplifier out to the stage with him and takes it off with him as well. He was so down to earth, Alan. Where's that come from?
I think it comes from being a Canadian, from a small town. The last time I spoke to him was in December of 2020, when we had just finished a live stream event at the Elma Combo in downtown Toronto. And I asked him, you're at the time, I guess he was 81 years old. I said, what keeps you going? And he says, I'm a working musician. My job is to write songs and perform them for people. And I will go wherever the people want me. And if it means playing a small place, great. If it means playing a big stage, I will do that too. And there are so many stories about him being very humble. If his manager would have to cut off the line of the people who wanted to meet him after his show, because Gord would stay there until the very, very end. He'd be there for hours if he wasn't taken by the arm and gently said, Gord, that's enough for tonight.
The parties that he threw at his home in Rosedale in downtown Toronto were said to be quite legendary. Either of you ever go to one of those parties?
Not me, but boy, the stories.
Okay, you want to share a story, Alan?
Well, I just know that if he would be playing a show in Toronto, for example, he would invite all his friends, and it wouldn't be, Dylan would show up and the Dylan entourage. So you would sit in his room, his living room, and look around and see all this glitterati from the music industry. And in the middle 70s, it seemed a bit incongruous because Toronto was not known as a music center. That came years later. So it was these things, under the radar stuff, limited access events that contributed to the star power that we began to project from here in Toronto.
I want to be sort of careful, and I hope people will understand there's a generosity behind this question. I remember seeing Frank Sinatra perform late in his life when, he'd occasionally forget lyrics. He had lyrics on teleprompter, that kind of thing. And he wasn't the same guy that he was when he was in the Rat Pack, 50 years earlier, but he was still Frank. And people loved seeing him perform. And having seen Gord perform at Massey Hall, I guess about a year and a half ago, it was pretty clear the voice was just not the same. He had some difficulty strumming the guitar. He was 82 years old at the time. And Pam, I wonder what's your view on whether or not he should still have been playing that late in the game?
I think Gord loved to play, as Alan has said. He'd love to play to the audience and the patrons, and certainly in Orillia and across the world, they loved to hear him. And I heard a comment from somebody a number of months ago who said they were there to see and hear the icon, not necessarily, the change in his voice and his music. He was an icon, and they were there to see him.
Well put. Alan, what would you say? I know at the concert that I went to a year and a half ago, people were yelling at him from the audience in the middle of his songs, cheering him on. I mean, the love was just fantastic. What do you say to that?
Well, the last time I saw him, again, was at this live stream event at the end of 2020. It was locked down. I think there were maybe 30 people there because we were in the depths of COVID. And his voice was not what it was. However, it was better than it had been, to my ears, than several years earlier, when he was still suffering from the after effects of that terrible aortic aneurysm he had in 2003. He had also regained his mobility on his right hand. He had lost feeling in two fingers as a result of a stroke in 2006. And he was determined to continue to perform as long as he possibly could. This was a man, up until recently, that was hitting the gym 6 days a week. He knew he was closer to the end than the beginning. He knew that his body had been through some terrible things over the last 20 years, but he was determined to stay in as good a shape as he possibly could so he could continue to play.
Pam, there's a Mount Rushmore of singer-songwriters, and I guess Paul Simon's up there, and I guess Leonard Cohen's up there, and Joni Mitchell, and, well, Bob Dylan, obviously, Carole King. Okay, where's Gordon on that mountain? I
think he's right there along with them. And I think wherever they have landed, there's going to be one heck of a concert happening. John Prine, Tom Petty, those that have gone before him. It's going to be amazing.
Alan, does he belong in that company?
Absolutely. And, one of the things I think we're going to see, it's usually inevitable that when an icon dies, they experience a spike in the popularity of their music. And one of the, we talked about all the artists that have covered Gordon Lightfoot up until now. I think we're going to see in the near term a number of other people rediscover Gordon Lightfoot, his songs, and how those songs can be manipulated and interpreted in a variety of different ways. I mean, this is a folk singer from Orillia, Ontario, who has had his songs interpreted by hip hop artists. That'll tell you about something about the origin material that Gordon left us with.
Lovely. The legend lives on, doesn't it? If you're a young songwriter today, you got to take a lot of inspiration from putting his LPs on, which some of us of a certain age still do, and loving it. I want to thank Pam Carter from the Mariposa Folk Foundation for joining us from Orillia, Ontario, and Alan Cross, the ongoing history of new music, 102.1 The Edge, joining us from Oakville, Ontario. It was really good of you two to join us and share your memories of a musical legend in this country, one of our great troubadours, Gordon Lightfoot. Thanks, you two.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.